Hi, my name is Dan O'Donnell. I grew up in the area. I was raised at Clark and Belmont, went to St. Sebastian's Grammar School, went to DePaul Academy when it was a high school, when there were like 1,400 students in the college. The professors I had throughout my high school years eventually all became the people that ran the university. So Father Comerford O'Malley and Father Munster and Father Richardson and even Dennis Holsnyder, the president today, were all people that we had met in Father Brennan over the years. And since I was one of the few high school students that had a car, whenever I got jugged, usually for 30 days, you weren't allowed to use a pen in school. Your homework had to be done in ink. If you were caught with a pen, you got 30-day jug. Jug was 2 hours after school, subtracting 2 from 10,000, and you just had to do it. But since I had a car, I always got to run errands instead. So that we became good friends, pretty much, myself and all the rector people at DePaul, including our coach, Ray Meyer, and Tracy, and O'Sullivan. All these people were good friends through the years. When I attended DePaul University, and I didn't really want to be a student, so I quit in 2 years. Went into business, and in 1968 or 67, before the riots, I became part of Armitage Hardware and Building Supply on Armitage and Bissell. In those days, the area was a war zone divided by gangs, and if you lived south of Armitage, you really needed a gun. It just wasn't safe. In those days, you could buy anything on the block for $4,000 to $10,000. And when the riots happened in '68, we boarded our windows up on Armitage because the community was being burned up. The school was now Lincoln Park High School, was Waller High School, and it was probably one of the tougher schools in the city. And the youngsters that would go to Waller School would always go south towards Cabrini Green. So the streets, everything south of Armitage became the walking streets for the young kids at the school, and consequently nothing could be left outside, unlocked up, because it would be stolen. And the drug use in the area was heavy, and it was obvious. The drug use was any corner you could buy what you wanted. And in those days, the drug of choice seemed to be heroin, and there were just lots and lots of people. We had a lot of addicts. So consequently, we had a lot of people selling drugs, and there was always a lot of stories going around. We had a lot of the First Ward criminal activity going on from downtown. It was the day when you still had the old buildings that had the basements that were used for prohibition, for alcohol and drugs and everything else. A lot of people became very wealthy. But anyway, when I went in during '68, we boarded our windows up, everything was done. They started redoing the alleys by us, they started paving them, and all those nice paver bricks were laid out there in piles, and you could take what you wanted in those days. So Frank and I, we did Bissell all the way down 3/4 of the block in the 1900 block with paver bricks, and they're still there today, and they're a great parkway area. It's easy to keep clean, doesn't get too messy. Anyway, we've done that. And during the years, some of the early years, I would see that the paver bricks were always disheveled in a certain area, so I was always over there digging them up and replanting them. And one of the drug boys, one of the youngsters of the gang came up and says, "You really shouldn't be doing that." He says, "In fact, stop." He says, "We'll be neater about it, but this is our drug drop." So I said, and I just, okay, turned my back, and everything was neat after that. The kids growing up in the gangs in the '60s, late '60s, they were 9 and 10 years old, and they used to come in the hardware store all the time, and they would have a broken bicycle or a wagon or a cart or something needed to be fixed for their parents. And Frank and I were pretty good about always doing it, and we really never charged the kids for anything. And as the kids matured and grew up in the '80s, they became the gang leaders. And our store, we were robbed 2 or 3 times in the early '70s heavily, and we had a man on the block called Ollie Harth. He was the mayor of Bissell, and he always had a gun in his back shirt. So he was always walking around, and he was looking after the old timers living there, And he wasn't a man to reckon with, but he was a good friend. And I remember one time Allie was witnessing they were robbing our store. And they had been robbing it from 4 in the morning till 8. So Allie followed them, and there was a garage in the 1700 block of Bissell. He marked it down, and at 9 o'clock we opened, we called the police, we got all our stuff back, and it was good. But anyway, the gang members still used the hardware store as an initiation thing. They would go in and they would steal a case of drill bits worth $1,000. They were up on the shelf, they were locked, we couldn't figure how the blazes they ever stole them. But everything they stole was returned on Saturday morning. It was on our dock. So the kids, even though they had grown up, they had an appreciation for us. In the early 70s, the L was a terrible place over there. People were being mugged over there. There was wars over there. There were, when the old bar with the Royals store, the bar and the grocery store on the corner were owned by that family. There was a gang war. It was all black and Spanish. And there were a number of people killed. And it never even made the news because it wasn't a white person involved. One of the things in the statistics of the city up until I think the early 80s was that when they talked about the murders and the robberies, if it was black, Spanish, Puerto Rican, whatever, it never really was part of the record. So when they said they had 300 murders in 1981, that was only the whites. They never included the other groups in it. So there was always a management of the news, and that was sad. The L, we decided, myself, Frank Scherer, Father Hoffman was involved, and the Cox family, we formed an organization called Armitage Friends and Neighbors, and we were going to recondition the L. So what we did is we raised $40,000. We hired 3 of the gang's members, and they worked, and they all got paid for helping, and we put planter boxes along the building at Gaelic Cox's, right, which was now Shinnick's drugstore, and we repaved all the sidewalk, or all the dirt areas under the L. We put new sidewalks out. We took the doors off the L. We stripped all the windows and restored the doors back to normal. They were painted a dozen colors. Took all the graffiti off the buildings. Got arrested for taking the doors off the L because it was their property and we had no rights. And we had to go to court, and the judge said, you know, he said, what you did is fine, it looks excellent, everything is good. He says, but if you didn't like your neighbor's house, you have the right to go over and redo his house. And then he just dismissed me with verbal and no charges. I had to pay a penalty. But the gangs agreed that there would be no graffiti, no incidents of crime from Sheffield to Bissell on Armitage on the north side of the street. Virtually, with that agreement, there was never a problem there for 20 years. And the penalties were heavy. If you used a gun to rob somebody or something, it was a broken leg or an arm. And the gang members, between the 3 gangs, they totally made the deal. It was fine. We shook on it, it was good, and it was never violated, which to this day I can't believe, because, and then at the same time, Gary Larson, who's also is involved with the calendar, The Far Side. Do you remember those from the old days? He was a starving artist. We had a colony of them living on Clybourne, and where the frame service is now. And what they did is they rented the factory, and Julian had curtains hanging here, and he did his here. Gary had his art studios here, and they were all mixed up there. But whenever they needed something, they were always at the hardware store. Well, they never had money to pay for anything. So consequently, we have a lot of Gary Larson stuff, we have a lot of Julian Haar stuff, and it's pretty neat. Also at that time, St. Teresa's was always in trouble. The congregation had drifted downwards. The people that were there really couldn't afford to give much. They were of a poorer nature. After the fire and the new building went up, things weren't quite the same. With the riots of the convention of '68, young people came and grabbed their families. They grabbed Fremont and Dayton and all the old Italians and the old Germans. You would be 55, 60 years old living in the suburbs. you came and you grabbed your mother and dad and everything you could put in the car and you got the heck out of the neighborhood. And you never came back. Funny, a lot of the people come back in the 90s, the kids that took the parents away. And I said, gee, we used to have a building in 1935 Fremont. So I'd walk over with them and we'd look at it and they'd say, well, what's that worth today? And you'd say, well, today it's like, in those days, this is the 90s now, so it was worth about $400,000. Well, today those empty lots are worth $1.5 million. So they're thinking, gee, my home in Des Plaines or Wooddale, wherever it was, it only went from $40,000 to $80,000. We walked away from the money buckets, and they did. A lot of those houses, when they walked away, they never came back. The old furniture was there, whatever was in the garage was there, and you bought a building for taxes for $2,500. My partner, Frank Shear, was involved with the Lincoln Park Builders Club. And they bought a building on Halsted, which they still have today. And his partners in there, they eventually bought 80% of Dayton from Armitage to Willow in there. And it was like 4 members of the Builders Club. And basically they got financing to tear down and to do work from Billy Salestis, was involved with American Express in 1970s. And he had hundreds of grain bins supposedly full of grain and wheat, and he pledged all of that to this loan. Well, lo and behold, those bins were empty. So it became the Texas, whatever, soybean scandal or something like that in the old days. So Frank and his partners were being held up by the government and others for being part of a bad deal. So anyway, Frank and John Kringer and Greg Stamish's father, I don't remember the names, but anyway, they all got out of the deal with their shirts on their back and no jail, but they only got $50,000 for the whole investment each in that property. And they owned everything. When people walked away, it went for taxes, in 2 years. I mean, another little story, we had a gentleman, Jimmy Rea, who was a member of St. Teresa's years ago. And in the early 70s, Jimmy had 6 or 7 buildings on Bissell in the 1800 block on the L side. He owned the hardware store. We were also the neighborhood bank. When they would remodel the house, they didn't have money. They'd pay us here and there, and it was a difficult time for everybody. Jimmy come in the store and he says, "I've had it." He says, "You can have all 6 buildings or 7 buildings for what we owe you, the $7,000. We're moving to California." And I looked at Frank and I said, if we do that, that means I have to do all the work. And I said, I really don't want to deal with that right now, not at all. So we walked away from that. We didn't do it. So 2 years later, Jimmy sent us his money that he owed us, 6 or 7 from California, and he was real happy. Today, and that's when George Thrush came upon the scene. Do you remember George? George Thrush came upon the scene in about those days and was picking up all the stuff for taxes. And just a lot of property he developed there. So anyway, that was the story on that, the Texas scandal. Father Hoffman was always in trouble for money. And Frank and Father Hoffman were very good friends. So through the years, Frank always helped him out. And then when it came time, Frank ran the bingo game for him and did very well to pay for a lot of other stuff in the building, the boilers and whatever had to be done was basically financed through Armitage Hardware. And then Sister Celestine was always working with the poor people. Do you remember Sister Celestine? Well, she was on our weekly payroll, so we had her forever on that. She would get her $20 to $50 a week, and that always went out for whatever. So she was wonderful. And then later, one of her dreams were that she really wanted to be with Mickey Mouse. She wanted to see Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. So Frank and I worked out a deal, and we sent her with another nun to Disney World, and we had called in advance to some people we knew at Walt Disney, and basically Mickey became her guide for the week. And it was one of the greatest experiences of her life. So that was some of the things we did. And with the food things, that Father always needed a slush fund. There was always kids with no shoes. There was always hungry people. There was always just so clothing. So Frank saw that he always had a slush fund. So that was part of our involvement. That kept him alive. Anyway, those years are gone. Oh, and then we had a tent city under the L. We had homeless people. And we used to get, Frank and I would go up to, what was the name of it, Polk Brothers. And we would get the big refrigerator boxes. And they would use those under the L, and they had them packed with newspaper and cardboard and all their belongings. But one of the problems, we had about 12 people living there. They wouldn't live in shelters. They were confirmed people that you move in a shelter, no, they were back on the street. So you moved them there and you kind of organized it, and we kind of saw that there was a little protection for them from the local police. The neighbors didn't like it, but that's how it was. And then they were getting beat up the first of the month. The money would come to the bank, and they had to go to the bank and they get their money. The bank wouldn't give them a little bit, they had to take it all. So they were all getting beat up. So I said, well, we can change that. So we had the checks all sent to the hardware store in their name. I had a ledger, and I would give you, if you had $200, you would get $50 a week. Well, that worked for about a month. Then it was like, John would come in, and he'd come in, he needed money between, you'd give it to him. Then the third week there was nothing left, and he would come in and, you took all my money. You know, you didn't give me all my money. You took my money. Well, about 5 people doing that, go back, let's stop all this stuff, go back to the bank, you guys take care of yourselves with this. I'll help you out a little bit, but I'm not going to be in the position that you're making me a thief. When the 80s come and things started changing, and the neighbors started gentrifying a little bit, we had a lot of new people moving in the blocks, but when they moved in, they were victims because they were new and they didn't understand that you can't leave a door open or you can't leave the car in the street with stuff in the back seat. So many break-ins and so many things. We're still getting a lot of the break-ins, but it's all come down now. And how Burling and Mohawk become the most expensive streets in Chicago, God only knows, because when you have to haul your garbage out on the street to get it picked up, and you have no alleys, and you have nothing going for you, why did they pick those streets? Why didn't you pick Dayton or Fremont or something where you at least get your garbage picked up on it without taking it outside? So anyway, we've gentrified to the point now where the stuff around here is priceless, so much of it. We've got buildings coming down every day, which you see. We got St. Teresa's being remodeled. New people, great people at St. Teresa's, young people. More children than any church has in Chicago, I think. And we got involved with the Irish kids 1996, 97. There were 8 or 10 sitting on the doorstep of Shinnick Drug Store at 2 in the afternoon on a Friday. And they were still there at 7 at night when I closed the store, so I went over to find out what the deal was. They opened their mouth, we knew where they were from. We didn't ask, they were from Ireland, and that they had used up their money in the hostels. And even in those days, the hostels would say, you come, you made a reservation for 3 days, $30 or $25 a day, whatever it was then. But then if you have to stay the 4th day, it's doubled. And they still do it today. So they charge $40 now, and whatever you didn't reserve, you doubled it because they were so busy. So they were kind of usury, and the kids were broke. So I had called at that time and talked, it had to be John Hoffman, and he gave me the gym, the old gym downstairs. He had 2 bathrooms and little lockers and stuff for girls and guys, and we put those in on air mattresses, and by the end of the month we had 50 kids. That we had once they were there were 4 or 5 days, but he was my dumping ground, and then we'd find housing for them. But that mushroom, where last year we had 1,500 of them here. For June, July, and August, into May, all of June, July, and August. And basically they get off the plane and they have their round trip, they have insurance, the passports, we get them the Social Security card and the work permit, housing, and jobs. And then we also have the doctors to help them, we also have the lawyers to get them out of jail when you have the problem. So, and that's mushroomed, and it's huge. And now we have entrepreneurs that are in there, and the kids this summer have been fleeced out of $750,000. So we got a whole new problem now with housing and stuff. So just some of the little things, and now we're to the point where St. Teresa's is evolving around with all the new things there. The population is gonna probably go up 25% once this new church opens. And you've got St. Vincent de Paul and St. Joseph. St. Teresa's future was disappearing. We sold the kindergarten building across the street. You got, I don't remember, but it was like $80,000 or something. And with the new buildings going down, you're going to have 3 or 4 $4 million houses go up over there. So, everything's gentrifying, and the plans for Teresa's are good, and it would have been closed a long time ago if it wasn't for Father Frank. It would have been closed. Father Frank is your savior to that church. Otherwise, it would have been absorbed by St. Vincent's or Josaphat's. St. Vincent's isn't really part of the Archdiocese because they're controlled by the Vincentians, but Josaphat's and St. Clement's, and we're very much part of St. Teresa's. And Father Frank is probably one of the few priests that does not put me to sleep with his sermons. Okay, I think that it's marvelous. I think that he's a dynamic, very devoted man, and then so we've always been part of the neighborhood. And then when DePaul got into trouble with a lot of the neighbors here when they were buying so much property, I was kind of an ombudsman for them because I was in the neighborhood and I knew a lot of the people and a lot of the situations that they were involved in. With Father Munster and myself and Father Croak, who's still part of it, and that whole group, we would work on ways to pacify the neighborhood for what they were doing. And now it's a great university. You're the largest Catholic university in America, 30,000 students. 40 years ago when I was there, 1,800. And there's so many good memories. We need a basketball team. we need the DePaul Stadium over by Finkel Steel, not downtown. Things like that. But our neighborhood is good. But Finkel Steel has a lot of problems. That's the single most polluted area in the state of Illinois. I remember years ago, we were going to buy up where Joe's Fisheries is and Matinke's properties there, and the prices were right. But when we found out that we were responsible to the middle of the river for cleanup with Finkel across the street, the cleanup, if you take the river and you stir it up there are so many poisons in there from mercury for 100 years of steel mill, because that was the way they cooled the steel and ran it in and out before any regulation. So today with that, the only thing that we see that would be legal would be a shopping center, which we don't need, a stadium, a golf course, or a park. Sorry, one little tidbit I forgot about, the landmarking of our area. Years ago, they came up with an idea and they hit us with it in the spring. It's probably 2002, somewhere around there, that they were going to landmark our area, that we were candidates for it. And in order to landmark a building, it has to meet 8 of 10 criteria. And what happened was they were going to landmark everything from Racine down to Lincoln Park High School. And there was no area that they wouldn't landmark. Well, it was including St. Teresa's, it included the Greater Little Rock Baptist Church, included everything. And as we started going into it, we formed a committee, and we organized all the owners, a small committee of us, and we said that we would invest $15 million into our properties if they wouldn't landmark us. We would each do this, and we would submit to a group and show that we're doing this. And they had a meeting at Lincoln Park High School. There were like 250 people there, and I started to present the ideas that the committee came up with the investment of money and don't landmark us, and we'll do all of these things. And I was told, sit down, I was out of order, and that we decide that we're going to be landmarked. And there were 4 people on that committee down there. And they said, basically, you have nothing to say. And we had reporters there and everything, and I was forced to sit down. We didn't have any rights. So then, anyway, the landmarking was going, so I did a lot of stuff to my building. I had 8 months to do it before it could take effect. So I did the windows, and I did a lot of different things to our buildings that I couldn't do once the landmarking went in. We did anything we needed to do before the landmarking. And then since I was the forefront of it, we became the receiver of a lot of the problems. Now, today, we get bills, and they said they inspected the roofs, and they found that there's 7 condensers. Well, each condenser is a $50 a year tax. The bays that hang out over the streets, those are $75 each for tax, separate to everything else, okay? And then if you have a stoop that happens to go onto the street part, that's $200 a year tax. So they had all of these different things that started to come down on us in the neighborhood. And then at that time it was Vi Daly. She had everything suspended, we thought, permanently. However, it was suspended for 5 years and it came back again. So now we're doing battling on that. And then we found that the churches cannot be landmarked if they're true churches. So like the Greater Little Rock Baptist Church, St. Teresa's were taken off the landmarking deal, which is fine because they're churches. Also, we have a lot of brand new buildings in there that weren't eligible for landmarking, but they wouldn't take them off. So that was something. Then you find out 2 years later that the reason this happened, there was a lot of money in Washington for landmark properties for cities like St. Augustine, Florida, Charleston, New York, Manhattan, Brooklyn, that if the money wasn't, if you didn't landmark these things, you'd lose the money. And it was a lot of money. So that's the reason that we wound up with a half a dozen areas here that have been blanketed. There was 140 buildings landmarked in one scoop, and it takes years to landmark one building. But this was done in one shovel. So however it was done, and we're living with it now. So that was the story of our landmarking of our area. And a lot of our buildings are beautiful and they do look good. So anyway, end of story.